Hello and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, What's Trending in Learning Tech, sponsored by Administrate, ELB Learning, Open Sesame, SAP Litmos, and Scope AR. I'm Mike Schoenbach, event producer and your host for today. Before we dive into this session, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speakers and get the most out of today's sessions. Throughout today's event, please feel free to chat comments into the chat window and submit questions in your Q&A window. I will be monitoring your comments and saving your questions for the Q&A toward the end of the session. I've enabled closed captions for this event. You may select to turn on or off the subtitles by locating the closed caption icon in your toolbar. I encourage you to share the information you received today via social media by following our handle @training INDUSTR. That's at Training Industry, but without the Y at the end. We will be engaging in the Twitter conversation throughout the event, so please feel free to join us there. At the end of your time with us, you'll notice a short survey is popped open in your browser. We'd appreciate your thoughts on today's event. And lastly, all of our sessions are being recorded and will be archived on trainingindustry.com, and you will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the on-demand sessions. If this is your first Training Industry event, we'd like to welcome you. Training Industry exists to make connections among learning and development professionals. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D through live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, and our podcast. Make Training Industry your go-to resource for learning solutions. Visit trainingindustry.com to learn more. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker, David Nedohin. With 20 plus years in advanced manufacturing and over 12 years focusing on augmented reality solutions, David Nedohin is a leading voice in the digital transformation of the learning industry. He is one of 3 founders of Scope AR and a 4-time curling world champion. And David, please take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Mike, and thank you for having me here today. This is fantastic. As mentioned, my name is David Nedohin. I'm one of the founders and the Chief Customer Officer with Scope AR. So my team works with all of our customers in ensuring that they're having successful engagements with our software and really kind of driving to value. And so what I'm here to talk about today, and it's a really great topic for us. Training is extremely important from our perspective and all of our customers. It's really about, how technology, how augmented reality is changing the way that organizations and individuals are really thinking about training and approaching training. So I'm going to jump into a presentation here. Let me share my screen. I'm assuming that will take over sharing there, and we'll hit play here. So hopefully everybody can see my screen okay. And one of the interesting things about what I'm going to talk about, and we probably didn't tell this to the training industry before we started, was that it's a little bit also about the anti-training, like the opposite of training. So I probably should be kicked off the session right now for saying that, but it's more of a change in the way the organizations are looking at training and the way that individuals look at training. So Training 1.0 had lots of challenges, has lots of challenges with it, as we all know. We've been encountering this for quite some time in the way that workers learn technology. And the challenge is that technology is changing so fast, it's getting more complicated, there's higher turnover rate. It's probably impossible to think that you're actually going to train on everything that you're ever going to encounter when you're in the workforce. So these are challenges that are trying to be addressed through kind of a digital transformation. And when you think about what that means, in-person training instructions are very challenging. You probably have to bring a whole bunch of people together, which means it's really expensive. Your experts are specifically the ones that are often delivering that training, which means they're actually not delivering on supporting maybe the equipment and the support that needs. It's kind of low engagement. You hand somebody rectangular training materials, whether it's an iPad or whether it's 200-page document, and it's not overly engaging. It's sitting down and reading it, and how much is actually retained is challenging at times, right? There's higher turnover rates, so often training takes 12 months, 18 months, and then a worker may only be there for 2 to 3 years. So there's a whole kind of a whole challenge with the ROI that comes with that. So lots of challenges that can be addressed through digital transformation. And when you think about that, it's really about making sure that workers have those best practices right in front of them when and where they need it, that it's engaging, that it's easy, that it's real time, that it's up to date, but also it's not finite. It's not like you go through training, and you complete these set of learning tasks, and then you complete a test and you're done, but it's an ongoing journey now. So when you're out in the field, once you've completed your training, it's great that you've got the competency that you've completed this, but what happens when the equipment is maybe slightly different, or that the training or that the procedures to maintain that equipment have changed a little bit, or that maybe you learned on it a long time ago and you need to make sure that you're completely up to speed. So training has transformed from sort of this like finite element, and I know it's an ongoing journey, everyone continues training, but when you're there at the moment, making sure that you've got the right instructions, the right best practices, that you complete that task, whatever it is that you're doing, with best practices in front of you, you can validate you've done it correctly. And as the worker, you feel good about it, right? You know that you've done it correctly and it's actually captured and stored, and you can validate that you've done it correctly. So the whole journey itself has extended to doing the work. And that's why I say it's a little bit of anti-training, because it means that when you're there, maybe something's different that you haven't been trained on, but you're still expected to do it right because organizations are looking for efficiency. So, when you think about that from kind of both the organization and the worker perspective, what if, for example, you think about something like, The Matrix, where Keanu Reeves was obviously a character in that, and they were plugged into some sort of infrastructure that allowed them to learn, best practices on something they had no idea about just on the spot. So in this case, he's like, hey, I want to know Kung Fu. So it just downloads it, he instantly knows Kung Fu. Or, what if it's, I want to fly a helicopter, or build a helicopter, or fix a helicopter, or a server, or a piece of medical equipment, whatever it might be. That's where we're at today, right? Organizations are, through augmented reality, can provide those best practices to the workers, so they have that information when and where they need it. And the great thing about it is that it's on devices that we all have in our pockets today. Everybody has an AR enabled device. They've got a smartphone or a tablet, so that you can actually do what's shown here in terms of, I want to learn Kung Fu. In this case, I want to know how to fix the server and have the best practices and validate I did it correctly. So that's literally what augmented reality can deliver. So, workers want things easy. They want to know that they have the best practice in front of them, that they're going to perform the task correctly. Organizations are looking for faster. They're looking for more, efficiencies on what they do. They want to reduce downtime. They want to improve customer satisfaction. So it's all about, improving the training process for both the organization and the worker, and to make the trainee kind of a more effective worker, just like we saw in, The Matrix many years ago. So there's some really key words that we think about when we look at this. What are some of the challenges that exist today? And it's like, kind of organized in this way where it's like sort of all over the place for a reason, but workers are looking for information that's very visual. They want it to be clear. They want it to be concise. 2D documents don't really deliver that. You can sit on your couch and you can be reading that, but you're not really working with the equipment in front of you, right? It needs to be accessible to everybody with up-to-date instructions that are contextual and relevant. So those are challenges that happen when you publish training material or best practices, and all of a sudden those best practices change a little bit, or the equipment changes a little bit. So how do you make sure you have that in front of you at all times? It needs to be actionable. So you think about the challenges with a lot of the organizations is that equipment is expensive and not everybody has access to it. So how do you make it accessible and actionable? They can actually do something right in front of them wherever they are, so that you're not waiting weeks and months to get somebody into a room to actually do some sort of training. Well, with augmented reality in this case, and we'll demonstrate a little bit more about this shortly, you can actually put that equipment right in front of you wherever you are, to make sure that somebody's going through the training process as if they have it right there. It doesn't mean that they need to have the actual equipment, but imagine a holographic view of it that's real size, that you can walk around, that you can engage with in a meaningful way that's actionable, as opposed to just reading instructions. And then it becomes traceable. So there's lots of data, lots of information. We'll talk about that in a whole digital thread concept in a few moments, but you can verify that you've done it correctly, and it ties into the systems of record that an organization has as they build out kind of their technology stack of digital information. So augmented reality delivers this type of experience to workers to make sure that it's engaging and their competency is much higher, saving the organizations a lot of money as they go forward. And this is being shown in all sorts of use cases that we'll talk about shortly. So I guess, what is augmented reality as well, right? It's something that I know that we're talking about, and not everybody has a good view of it. So, virtual reality, we'll start there, both kind of like a digital reality. Virtual reality is when somebody puts on a headset and they go into a completely digital environment. So in this case, somebody is on a bike, they're getting a good workout, they put on their VR headset, and all of a sudden they're still in their room where they're biking, but they're in the Alps, for example, biking. And so, you have to be careful depending on what you're doing, because, you might be actually walking around running into something that's in your room. So in this case, obviously he's stationary on a bike, which is a really great way in some ways to train. Augmented reality is a little bit different in that it basically places digital content in your real world to improve that environment. So it could mean a number of things. It could be, for example, that the person on the left is working on the heat shield for the Orion shuttle, which, yay, the Artemis took off today, which is very exciting. We were part of some of the steps in that. But it could be somebody's working on the heat shield on the Orion shuttle, and from a training perspective, they want to know what they're going to do before they actually get to it. So in this case, I could use the person's wearing a Microsoft HoloLens, I could use the HoloLens, or I could use my tablet or smartphone, and I could actually place that heat shield right here on this desk beside me in the office I'm working in. And so completely holographic view, full size, I can walk around it. I can learn what I need to learn. I can document that I've gone through all the steps to learn it before I actually get to the heat shield. Then I get to the heat shield and it's like, now you see the real thing. You've already learned what you need to learn, but you want to make sure you're doing it right, because that's what this is all about. Just ensuring that workers complete the task correctly, right? That's ultimately, rework is a really nasty word. Everybody wants to fix first time or improve fixed time first rates. So in this case, the translation of information from a digital or a 2D drawing onto this would be often very challenging. So, what holes need to be drilled where, which fasteners need to go where, what torque settings do they have at each location. By using augmented reality, you can look at the actual equipment, and all the red ones are a certain fastener and they tighten to a certain torque setting, and you can say next and go on to the green ones that are a different hole size and a different torque setting and a different fastener, and the blue ones and purple ones and so forth and so on. The great thing about this is that it's almost impossible to make a mistake. I mean, you would have to literally go and put a fastener when you're seeing only the red ones in a green hole for some reason. So it's accountable. You've trained before getting there. You don't necessarily need to have the heat shield in front of you. You can go to the equipment and you're still training, but you're on the job training, you're doing it right. Best practices are there right in front of you. So that's a little bit of a difference between AR and VR, right? And as a company at Scope AR, we focus on augmented reality software, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So when we think about what this means to the worker, right? There's different types of technology that organizations are leveraging. Everybody's thinking about digital transformation. What does this mean for your organization? What tools do you have? And there's a whole bunch of different aspects to that all kind of tie together in the journey for the worker. And at the end of the day, it's all about the worker having those best practices and doing something right from initial stages of training right through to execution. So there's tons of data that's been captured about everything, right? And that data is connected into a digital thread, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But that information tells you when something was built and when it was serviced and who worked on it, what the parts were, where they came from, when it was maintained, which kind of coincides with IoT. For example, if you can imagine, there's a kind of a server rack in the background right there, and it's got a lot of data that's in there. So what happens when something breaks and now there's a flashing red light and it sends a signal to a service center, and the service center says, great, based on the information we know, this is what the worker needs to do. So they're going to select the worker based on obviously the competency and the training that's happened in advance. So things like quizzing and intelligent quizzing. Is that worker qualified to be there? Yes, we can verify that worker is. But when they get there, we want to make sure that there's a review of best practices and that they're all up to date. So through the delivery of 3D content in augmented reality, they can now make sure that worker has the most current instructions. They can visualize it before they do the work. They can overlay it on top of the equipment to make sure they're following them step by step. They can even connect with an expert who could be somewhere else, which is another challenge that many organizations have. There's experts everywhere, or shouldn't say everywhere. Organizations have experts, but they're not everywhere. How do you leverage that expert's knowledge into the hands of the worker when and where they need it? So in this case, along with overlaying 3D content, the worker could also call an expert to share video, ask questions, and the expert could annotate and draw and confirm they're doing something right. And then at that point, all that data is captured and stores back into the digital thread, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So it's a whole journey of information and technology that ends with the worker having the best practices in front of them on whatever device they have. And like I said, we all have AR devices in front of us today, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet, or maybe something like a HoloLens if you're more advanced into, something like manufacturing and aerospace industry. So a little bit about the digital thread. I kind of mentioned it a moment ago. And for those, some may be familiar with it, some maybe not as much. The digital thread is all about the journey and the life cycle, product life cycle of a piece of equipment. So, if you can imagine where it starts, there's going to be some design that goes into that engineering design. Then they're going to have to go out and get all the equipment and parts they purchased from somewhere else. Then they're going to assemble that equipment, and then it's ready for distribution. So maybe it's like sales to a customer, or maybe it's internal, manufacturing, or maybe it's going into the hospital in an operating room and making sure that the surgeon knows how to use this equipment or why they want to buy it. And then at some point, you're going to want to service that equipment. So you need to train either your customer's service team, or you're going to need to train an internal service team, or maybe even a contractor to do some preventative maintenance, annual maintenance. Maybe it's unplanned downtime. How do you actually support that? So there's lots of different aspects to this. And then all of that information is collected and it's maintained right until the end of life. So at the end of life, it's like, great, how long did this equipment last? Was it serviced the way it was supposed to? Was there unknown errors that happened? If there was, how do we go back to the very beginning at the design stage, make some changes to that, and have that populate automatically to the worker who needs those instructions? Well, that can happen today. That's the digital thread. When you make a change in augmented reality, it can be delivered to the end worker. So that's where we focus as a company. We're a piece of that digital thread in augmented reality. So we focus on the build, the distribute, the service. So for workers who are like actually manufacturing something or inspecting it, installing it, maybe they're doing like calibrations or quality assurance, or they're maintaining it, servicing, whatever it might be. We build the instructions, or our customers, I should say, build the instructions using our software to make that possible. All of that information can tie into systems of record that an organization already has, like their field service management tools, or their CRM, or their MES system, or a learning management system in the case of education training industry, right? So those are critical to tie all that information back together so that eventually they can review the process and begin that journey again. So the integrations are really critical. And I know there's a lot of acronyms on here. You probably recognize some of them, maybe some of them you don't, depends on the industry. But the point is information is collected and maintained in a digital thread to maintain efficiency and delivery of best practices to whoever needs those, wherever they are. So I'm going to simplify it a little bit now. So I went from a very complicated slide down to one that obviously, is very simple. And this is really what we intended on being, is that we want anybody who's doing work to have the ability to do it correctly. That's what it's about. So in this case, just show the worker how to do something, make sure that they're trained to do it effectively, and support them with best practices and just validate they've done it correctly. So show me, train me, that's it. Anybody can do it. And so that happens through a software suite, right? So in our case, we have WorkLink, which has a couple different aspects to it. So I'll just kind of talk about that briefly in terms of how WorkLink supports an organization, because someone's probably like, oh yeah, this is really hard though, when it's not, right? We've been leaders and pioneers in this industry of augmented reality for a very long time. And as far as augmented reality goes, for 12 years, and developed a few different aspects to it, a few different levels to it. But ultimately, it's about creating content very easily that can be delivered to an end worker. So WorkLink Create on the left-hand side is about taking your CAD files, your instructions, your 3D content, or even scanned 3D content, because not everyone has 3D content, importing it into a simple browser-based application that you can, with no code and really no required previous experience, can navigate a very simple interface to build step-by-step guided animated instructions with all sorts of features and functionalities to it. You can make those available, you publish them, they are stored on the WorkLink platform, which connects those instructions to the right workers, makes them available to the people that need them. You can kind of manage those end users, connect people who you want to, store all of the data that's associated with doing that work, and make that data available to your systems record through things like the WorkLink, excuse me, the WorkLink API. And ultimately deliver them to the viewer on whatever device they have. So now they can, pick those instructions they need. They can open them up on their smartphone, their tablet, their wearables, whether it's a holographic view in advance to being in front of the equipment or right at the equipment, you can go through those instructions and you can connect to an expert, right, who could be helping you along the way. So lots of functionalities, very robust from an industrial perspective. Like I mentioned, we've got an API that allows you to connect all of our data to your systems of record. We work in very secure environments where you can do things like an on-prem install to meet those security requirements with like aerospace customers. You can validate users through things like single sign-on or make it available to many users through like QR codes. We connect with real-time data layers. So as opposed to like, just sort of a linear step-by-step instructions, it's kind of more like a choose your own adventure book. So in this case, like the data itself is choosing that adventure for you. If someone, let's say, has a Bluetooth torque wrench and they have to have it to a certain setting, they could tighten it. If it meets that requirement, great, go on to the next step. If it doesn't, it guides you down a different path, right? So those are all things that can be integrated into it. And also WorkLink quizzing. So quizzing is a really important part of that whole training process to make sure that workers have the information, the best practices, they've gone through those steps, and it's tied into your LMS or system of record. So we actually launched this feature several months ago. It's been very exciting. Lots of customers are really all about making sure that their employees are certified and validated. So a couple different modes to that. There's things like graded assessment. So what was the competency score of the worker at the end of the assessment? So give them a score, say this is where you're at, you've passed, you're certified, or just maybe it's a knowledge check. So you have to go through it, and even if you get it wrong, it'll make you do it again until you get it right. And now you've completed your knowledge check. That could be great for a refresher or certain different types of aspects of training. All sorts of content that can be created really easily in the authoring software, from checklists and multiple choice, and actually interacting. So with the actionable side, interacting with the 3D content in the real world, that's very possible too. And then getting all sorts of, like I said, integrations, feedback, quizzing, reporting through ScoreMX API, those types of things. So a really exciting module here. I'll just show you a quick demo of it, just so you can see what I'm talking about. I've mentioned, that you can place 3D content anywhere. In this case, you may not have this analyzer. It's an expensive piece of equipment, right? So instead of like waiting to be in front of it to learn, place it anywhere, walk around it, go through the validation and the checklists, right? In this case, it's actually asking you to tap on the actual part itself. And that time the person got it wrong, so letting them do it again. So all of those things are functions that are available to the author to decide how that happens. So it's completely interactive and allows the worker to engage in it as if that analyzer is right there in front of them. So really interesting, allows you to certify and validate. You could do that before you get to the equipment as well as being on the equipment, and then overlaying that right on the actual equipment, right? Life size, just lines up to it, continue on your way. So speaking of customers, these are some of the markets and industries that we focus in. Aerospace and defense has been extremely critical path for us in terms of tons of traction. And we're really excited, like we said, that the Artemis launched, and definitely our software is a big part of some of the manufacturing of the Orion shuttle. So that was really cool. I'm going to show you a video about that in a moment. Manufacturing, semiconductor, data centers, just making sure that equipment has very little downtime, that organizations know how to fix it and install it and get things up and running as quickly as possible. And life sciences, complicated equipment. Often sales teams are changing quite rapidly. How do you make sure they have best practices in front of them when and where they need it? And being in an OR, it's pretty important to have that. So those are some of the types of customers that we work with and focus on, and have seen tremendous value from leveraging AR to help with their training. Yeah, aerospace, like I said, it's a really big industry, working with some of the biggest players in that. If you can imagine the complexity of taking 2D instructions and trying to understand what that means on a real object, that is extremely complicated to figure out. So in this case, workers can just look at the equipment and they know what to do. So enormous savings in training and manufacturing in the aerospace industry. Medical device, another one, this customer was seeing a 40% increase in knowledge. So just thinking about the difference between sitting on your couch with some instructions and learning maybe a procedure to maintain this versus holding your tablet up to the object, and a little bit hard to see in that visual, but seeing animated content right on top of it so that you know exactly what to do. You learn best by doing something. So quite a big difference, right? Beckman Coulter, another one of our fantastic friends and customers, they're seeing 50% reduction in training time through that same process, just similar to the analyzer that I showed you in that one video just earlier. And last year saved over $2.5 million in travel costs alone, thinking about being able to train people in real time when they need it, getting them set up quicker versus, traveling to a location, taking an expert's time, getting everyone there, just a enormous savings just in travel costs, right? So all the things that organizations are trying to do, which is build efficiency, and workers are trying to do, which is just make it easy for me, right? Lockheed Martin, again, they've seen tremendous savings in different areas. Some of the training times were decreased by over 85%, but I'm going to play a short video here. This was released last year by Microsoft, and it features a good friend of ours, Shelley Peterson, who worked at Lockheed on the Orion shuttle and is with Microsoft, and they did a neat little video. We'll just let this play.
Orion is the only spacecraft that can take humans into deep space, like the moon into Mars. We're just finishing that development phase, moving into production, where we'll be launching Orion about once a year. We're using mixed reality technologies to benefit our programs, environments, and challenges so that we can produce spacecraft at lower costs with higher quality and less time. For Orion, we're using mixed reality to assemble the crew seat. When a technician puts on a HoloLens, they instantly see the work instructions instead of having to go through stacks of rectangular data, whether it's paper or another form of a screen. It understands the environment. It's anchored to the structure, and that allows us to place content within the environment. Being able to see the same design together and look through different options allows us to make those decisions more quickly. With every activity, we're seeing significant reductions in touch labor. We see increases in quality. What we found was that we could take an 8-hour activity and reduce it down to 45 minutes. We see a reduction in cost. We haven't had a single error that's been documented, which is really exciting. We're partnering with Scope AR, who's using Azure Mixed Reality Services to bring all of this to life. Mixed reality allows us to move more quickly from concept and design, spanning into tests and operations, and possibly even for astronauts in space.
So very cool that coincidentally that happened to be today that took off, and there was lots of excitement, I know, in our team and all around. I think everybody's been aware of that for quite some time. So exciting. And so really just kind of wrapping up, I mean, what we focus on as an organization is providing the software to our customers to build these types of instructions, to train their employees better, to make sure they just do the work right the first time, and leveraging their experts, connecting them to them through real time, making that available on, multi-platform on all devices. So wearables, handhelds, whatever it might be, and just making it scalable and accessible. So that's a little bit about kind of how Scope works and our product WorkLink, but more importantly, how organizations are thinking about, and not just thinking, but changing the way that they approach training, and how, obviously how workers are benefiting from that. So thank you for letting me share. Couple things just to wrap up on the bottom left, there is a QR code. So if you scan that QR code, you'll actually be directed to our community forum, which we just launched. So there's not a lot of content in there yet, but If you have questions, you want to learn something, we have a lot of really great customers who are excited to share their experience and learnings and tell you about their journeys, and love to have you participate in that. And on the right-hand side, there's a QR code that if you want to try WorkLink and see what it's like to actually play some content right in front of you, using whatever device you have, and have it there and walk around it and learn something about AR and maybe some instructions on some equipment, feel free to scan that code. It'll download the app, give you a list of instructions. You can select one, place it where you want, and go from there. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. And I think there's probably some time for questions here.
Yes, we have some questions. Can we have Scope AR create the AR content for us?
Yeah, great question. In fact, I would say that that's one way that customers really accelerate quickly. So we have a creative services team, and we kind of generally encourage involvement from our creative services team off the start. That doesn't necessarily mean always creating content for the customer. Sometimes that's working side by side with the customer to make sure their content originally would sort of meet that level that we would expect it to be at. So just helping accelerate it. But yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's creating content for the customer, because quite honestly, not everybody might have those resources right away. It's like, hey, we want to build this project. We want to show some value to it. We're building up a team. We need scope to create that initial project for us to, help accelerate. So yes, absolutely.
Great. Okay, next question. How long does it take to create an average AR training module?
Depends a little bit on complexity of it, but I mean, certainly as you get better at using WorkLink, and I would say I'll caveat that with WorkLink versus, not some softwares you need to be a software programmer, you need to know coding, and so I'll just refer specifically to WorkLink, where you don't need to be a programmer or have any background in that. You could probably be up and running meaning you could build your own projects, go through our training curriculum and process within a week. And from there, you could create definitely a nice 10-step project or 20-step project within a few days. I mean, it's not overly complicated once you kind of get the hang of it. I would consider it something like asking how long does it take to create a good PowerPoint presentation? Well, the better you are at it, the faster you're going to become. But I would say it's pretty rapid.
Thank you. Next question. Can you deploy your training on my employees' personal iPhones or smartphones?
Sorry, can we deploy the training on personal smartphones or iPhones?
On my employees' personal iPhones or smartphones.
So yeah, basically, it would be whatever device you would choose. So meaning if you've approved those devices to be something that you want to access the training from, it's just login credentials at that point. So as long as they can log in to your instance in our content management system, they'll see the content that you want them to see. And that could also mean that in our content management system, you're creating groups. So groups could be a certain group that has access to only specific training. Another group might have access to another set of training. You create a third group's got access to maybe parts of both. So that's up to you in terms of how you want to manage that, but it's very granular. And yeah, by all means, you can decide which types of devices would be approved based on sign-in.
Okay. How does this interface with an LMS?
Yeah, so we have basically an API that connects all the endpoint data that we collect. So in our content management system, we would see things like, who opened a project? When did they open it? How long were they on each step? Where were they? What was the checklist items and photos, and all of those little kind of pieces of data that exist in our content management system can be made available through the API, which we developed. Has been available for about a year, very robust, and allows us to determine with a customer. So first of all, what system of record are you using? It's a LMS, is it Docebo or whatever it might be, right? What data do you want? And then we have to do a little connector between those, but that's usually relatively quick now that the API is created and available.
Got it. And we have one last question. How much does WorkLink cost to get started?
Well, so I would say WorkLink depends on the scale that you're looking at. So we have customers that certainly are starting with, we'll call them, relatively small budgets, to customers who are spending a lot more. But It's a tricky question because if you're just going to be looking at a couple licenses, here and there, definitely you can be getting started for, I would call it a budget that you wouldn't scare you. Let's put it that way. I don't imagine we've ever run into that too often where there's not a starting point that the customer goes, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of functionalities if you're looking at things like integrations and number of licenses you have and all of that. It obviously allows you to scale as your organization scales, as opposed to starting you at like that top tier and being a very difficult hurdle. Our goal is to get you started as quickly as possible, and we understand very well from the organizations that we work with what that process looks like. So we've made sure to adapt to that so that you have that ability to start quickly.
Thank you. That was the last question. So do you have any closing remarks?
No, just thank you very much for inviting me and for the time. Hopefully for those who, weren't overly familiar with augmented reality, this gives you something to think about. Maybe for those who were already exploring it, helps you understand a little bit more about where, kind of our perspective on it and where our focus is and where we're seeing success with customers. But like I said, if you have questions or you're interested in learning more, definitely reach out to us directly, or feel free to go onto the community forum and ask questions there. We've got a lot of great customers that'd be happy to help out.
Great. Thank you so much, David. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Have a great day. Okay, well, thanks again to all of our dynamic speakers and to our sponsors, Administrate, ELB Learning, Open Sesame, SAP Litmos, and Scope AR. All of today's sessions are pre-qualified for a credit hour by SHRM, HRCI, ISPI, and CPTM. Early bird registration is now open for the 2023 Training Industry Conference and Expo, or TICE. TICE is where learning leaders gather to forge new connections and invest in becoming a more effective leader of learning and development. We hope you'll join us next June in Raleigh, North Carolina for TICE. Learn more at TICE, TICE 2023.com. That's TICE2023.com. Did you know Training Industry offers courses specifically designed around the training manager competency model? Training Industry has compiled over a decade of research to develop a catalog of professional development courses that connect you with expert instructors and the community of your peers to give you the tools, strategies, and resources you need to successfully manage a high-performing training organization. The Managing Learning Technology Certificate offers an overview of the complex array of learning technologies used within the training function. In this program, you'll learn how to manage learning technologies to optimize their business benefits, including improved efficiency, integration, collaboration, and more. Visit store.trainingindustry.com before the end of December and use discount code FROZEN10, that's FROZEN10, for 10% off any course. And one last reminder that a survey will pop open in your browser upon exiting, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. Until next time, my name is Mike Schoenbach. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.